The emergency lights of the shuttle painted everything in shades of crimson, a visceral reminder of the danger they now faced. The trail of translucent residue shimmered faintly, snaking from the now empty containment vial toward the airlock. It pulsed irregularly, like a heartbeat. Commander Novak tightened her grip on her sidearm, every muscle in her body taut with tension. "Everyone stay close," she said, her voice low but steady. "Quan, can you trace where it's going?" Dr. Quan knelt by the residue, his scanner trembling in his hands. "It's alive," he murmured, almost to himself. "The trail, it's generating faint energy bursts, like it's communicating." "Communicating with what?" Natalie Varga snapped, her voice tinged with panic. "We're in the middle of a dead planet." "Dead things don't grow," Quan shot back, gesturing to the residue. "Whatever this is, it's not dead. It's evolving." Novak cut them off. "Enough. Focus. Theo, secure the shuttle. Quan, stay on that trail. Natalie, check the systems. If that thing breached the lab, I want to know what else it compromised." Theo, visibly shaken, muttered something under his breath but moved to seal the airlock. The faint hum that had plagued them since their arrival seemed louder now, reverberating through the ship's walls and making the metal vibrate underfoot. As Natalie worked on the consoles, her voice wavered. "Something's wrong with the diagnostics. The whole system is glitching, like it's being rewritten. This isn't just interference, it's integrating." "Integrating?" Novak asked, her tone sharp. "It's in the ship," Natalie said, her voice trembling. "Whatever that thing is, it's not just growing, it's taking over." Before Novak could respond, a scream echoed from the corridor. The team spun toward the source, just in time to see Theo collapse against the bulkhead, clutching his leg. The translucent residue clung to him, climbing up his thigh like a living net. He clawed at it, his nails raking against his suit, but it was too late. The material fused with his flesh, spreading rapidly. "It burns," Theo howled, his voice ragged. "Get it off me." Novak surged forward, grabbing a nearby plasma cutter. "Hold still," she commanded, though her voice betrayed a tremor. She activated the cutter, its blue blade flickering to life, and pressed it to the edge of the residue. The material shrieked, a sound so high-pitched and alien that it set Novak's teeth on edge. But it recoiled, pulling away from Theo's body and retreating down the corridor. Theo collapsed, panting and pale. His leg was a ruin, skin and muscle warped into ridged, unnatural patterns. Jagged, blackened veins radiated out from the wound like invasive roots. "It's inside me," Theo gasped, his voice barely audible. "I can feel it, moving." Quan worked furiously to stabilize Theo, injecting him with broad-spectrum antibiotics and pain suppressants, though his expression was grim. "This isn't a normal infection," he muttered as he examined Theo's leg. "The tissue, it's merging with the foreign cells. It's like his body is being rewritten." "Can you stop it?" Novak demanded. "I don't know," Quan snapped. "This isn't something I was trained for." The hum around them deepened, almost resonant now, as if responding to the escalating fear in the room. Novak turned to Natalie. "What's the status on the ship?" "It's bad," Natalie replied, her voice brittle. "The residue, it's spreading through the systems, using the wiring as a host. If we don't shut it down, it'll take control of the entire shuttle." "We can't let that happen," Novak said, her voice firm. "We'll evacuate and regroup on the Erebus. Natalie, get us prepped for launch." "No," Theo rasped, his voice suddenly urgent. He was trembling, his face drenched in sweat. "We can't go back to the ship. If that thing gets aboard the Erebus, we'll bring it with us." For a moment, no one spoke. The implications hung heavy in the air. Minutes later, the team had made their decision. They would abandon the shuttle and attempt to destroy it remotely, containing the spread of the residue. Quan and Novak helped Theo to his feet, his weight sagging heavily against them. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, his breathing shallow, his eyes glassy. As they reached the airlock, a deep vibration rattled the walls. The hum had grown into a steady, throbbing rhythm that seemed to emanate from within the ship itself. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and went out. "Backup systems," Novak barked, her voice cutting through the darkness. The emergency lights sputtered to life, casting the corridor in an eerie red glow. But something was wrong. The walls were shifting. Black, glistening tendrils of the translucent residue snaked along the bulkheads, pulsating like veins. They writhed as if sensing the crew's presence, growing thicker with each passing second. "It's everywhere," Natalie whispered, her voice barely audible. The residue began to converge, coalescing into a massive, amorphous shape that blocked their path. It pulsed and quivered, its surface shimmering with alien colors. For a moment it was still. Then, from its depths, a grotesque semi-humanoid form began to emerge. The figure was a horrific amalgamation of human and alien biology, its warped features vaguely recognizable. Novak's stomach churned as she realized what she was seeing. "Marcus," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. The thing that had once been Marcus Hensley opened its mouth, emitting a guttural, gurgling sound that was almost a word. Its misshapen arms reached out, tendrils of residue spreading toward the crew. "Run!" Novak shouted. The escape was chaos. Natalie and Quan sprinted ahead, while Novak half-dragged, half-carried Theo, whose condition had worsened. His body was stiffening, his skin turning an unnatural shade of gray as the alien material continued to spread within him. They reached the airlock and scrambled out onto the planet's surface. Behind them, the shuttle groaned as the entity consumed it, its structure warping and twisting as if being absorbed into the alien organism. Novak hit the emergency detonator, and the shuttle erupted in a blinding explosion. The shockwave knocked them off their feet, and for a moment the world was silent. When Novak looked up, the fissure in the distance was glowing brighter than ever. The hum was back, louder, deeper, and more insistent than before. And then, from the depths of the fissure, something began to rise. The Erebus drifted above Abyssus 3, its hull groaning under the strain of the planet's gravity. Inside, the once pristine corridors were now tinged with shadows, the red emergency lights casting jagged patterns on the walls. The pervasive hum, low, guttural, and resonant, had followed them from the shuttle, growing stronger with every passing hour. It was no longer an ambient sound. It was a presence. Commander Novak stood in the cargo bay, staring at the preparation table where Theo's body lay, shrouded in a silver thermal blanket. His face, once vibrant and full of sarcastic wit, was now twisted in frozen anguish. The alien infection had taken him completely, reshaping him into something Novak could barely bring herself to look at. But before the end, Theo had begged her to stop it, to stop whatever was rising from the fissure. She tightened her grip on the detonator in her hand. They had one chance to end this. Natalie and Quan joined her moments later, their faces drawn and pale. The reality of their situation had settled heavily over them. They were alone, the last 3 survivors of the Erebus, and the planet beneath them was not just a mystery, it was a predator. "The fissure is expanding," Quan said, his voice trembling as he displayed the latest scans on a handheld tablet. "It's like the planet is opening. The signals we've been detecting, they're not random. It's communication, a call to something deeper." "Something deeper?" Natalie snapped, her voice breaking. "How much deeper does this nightmare go, Elias? We've lost Marcus, Theo, the shuttle. What else does it want? What else can it take?" "Us," Novak said, her tone cold and resolute. She turned to face them, her expression hard. "It's already spreading. If we don't stop it now, it'll consume the Erebus, and then it'll find a way off this rock. We know what it does, how it adapts. Imagine what happens if it gets loose in the colonies." Quan looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Natalie ran a trembling hand through her hair. "You're talking about going down there," she said. "Back into the fissure?" Novak nodded. "We plant the charges deep inside where the core of that thing is growing. We detonate from the surface and we finish this." "And what if it doesn't work?" Quan asked quietly. Novak didn't answer. She didn't need to. The descent was agonizingly slow. The planetary atmosphere battered the dropship with relentless turbulence, forcing Natalie to wrestle with the controls. Quan sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the display showing the fissure's location, the pulsating glow at its center growing brighter and more erratic. Novak remained motionless, her hand resting on the detonator, her mind running through the plan over and over. When they reached the surface, the fissure was unrecognizable. The once stationary glow now pulsed like a heartbeat, sending waves of green light rippling across the jagged landscape. The air shimmered with heat and particulate matter, distorting their vision and making every step feel heavier. As they approached the edge, the ground trembled beneath their boots. Novak peered into the abyss, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The fissure was no longer just a crack in the ground. It was alive. Veins of translucent material stretched deep into the chasm, pulsing with alien energy. Below, something enormous shifted in the darkness, its form obscured but undeniably vast. Natalie stared into the fissure, her hands trembling. "How are we supposed to stop that?" "With everything we've got," Novak said, fastening the explosive charges to her suit. "This is where we end it." The descent into the fissure was suffocating. The air grew hotter, heavier, as they rappelled down the jagged walls. The hum was deafening now, resonating in their bones, a malevolent sound that seemed to worm its way into their minds. Novak forced herself to focus, her gloved hands tightening on the rope with each step. "Commander," Quan said over the comm, his voice strained, "I'm picking up movement below us, multiple sources." "Stay sharp," Novak replied, though her heart was pounding. The movement soon became unmistakable. Shapes emerged from the glowing walls, humanoid forms twisted and fused with the alien material. Their faces were warped, half human, half something else, but their eyes still held glimmers of recognition. Marcus, Theo, and others, astronauts from the previous expeditions, their bodies grotesquely merged with the entity. One of them lunged. Novak drew her sidearm, firing into the mass of warped flesh. The creature shrieked, its voice high-pitched and alien, but it didn't stop. Quan and Natalie opened fire as well, their weapons lighting up the dark chasm. The creatures fell one by one, but more emerged, clawing their way up the walls, their movements frantic and unnatural. "We're almost there," Novak shouted, her voice barely audible over the din. She spotted a ledge below, a flat surface near the core of the glowing mass. "Plant the charges here." The core was a nightmare given form. It writhed and twisted, a massive, pulsating organ of translucent material and stolen flesh. Faces flickered across its surface, mouths opening in silent screams. Tendrils extended outward, anchoring it to the walls and pulsing with energy. Novak and Quan worked quickly, attaching the charges to the tendrils. Natalie stood guard, her weapon trained on the shadows, but her breathing was ragged. "It's waking up," she whispered. "We need to hurry." As the final charge was placed, the core shuddered violently. The hum became a roar, the walls trembling as if the fissure itself was alive. Tendrils lashed out, narrowly missing the crew as they scrambled to ascend. "Detonators primed!" Novak shouted. "Move! Move! Move!" They climbed desperately, the creatures below shrieking as they gave chase. The fissure collapsed around them, rocks tumbling and walls cracking as the entity thrashed in its death throes. When they reached the surface, Novak didn't hesitate. She slammed her thumb on the detonator. The explosion was blinding. The fissure erupted in a torrent of green fire, the shockwave knocking them off their feet. Novak shielded her face as the ground beneath them buckled and cracked. The roar of the explosion drowned out everything else, and for a moment it felt as though the entire planet would tear itself apart. When the dust settled, the fissure was gone. The hum had stopped. Novak sat up slowly, her ears ringing. Quan was nearby, coughing and wiping debris from his face. Natalie lay a few feet away, staring blankly at the sky. They were alive, barely. "It's over," Novak said, though her voice was hollow. She didn't feel relief, only emptiness. As they returned to the Erebus, Novak couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The planet was silent now, but the memory of the entity lingered, etched into her mind like a scar. Weeks later, an automated probe approached Abyssus 3, drawn by faint signals still emanating from the planet's surface. As it descended into orbit, its systems flickered. A hum began to resonate through its core, growing louder, deeper. Then the signal cut off. The void remained silent once more.